Fourth point I'd like to make is that humility lives under God's mighty hand. This is verse 6. The hand of God, which compelled the king of Egypt to let Moses and the people go, is the same hand under which we live. The same hand that was stretched out and performed an amazing intervention in the life of Nehemiah and bringing the Jews back from exile. That's the same hand under which we live. And the issue in verse 6 is that the humble believer lives with the awareness that God is sovereign in His power and He is provident in His purposes. And He knows what is best for His children. How will we be able to identify in ourselves whether or not we are living under God's almighty hand, whether we have that attitude of humility, whether we have that which would reveal itself in our actions? Well, part of it is this, that when we're on our own, in our cars, on the beach, in the woods, or in our room, when we're alone, whenever it is that we begin to think very circumspectly or in depth about ourselves and about God, we will find that in our hearts we start to recognize these simple truths. That we did not make ourselves. We had no control over the day of our birth. That we have no control over the day of our death, for the most part. That we have no control over the breath of air that we breathe or the blood that pumps through our veins. So, just in terms of the creatorship, we can see that we are under God's hand. And when we further ponder the matter, those of us who have been saved understand that it was God's power alone that brought us to Himself. Then our humility springs from our preparedness to say, "Oh Lord, I am totally dependent on You today." Totally dependent. But until we believe ourselves to truly be totally dependent on God, we will never display that attitude. And people will not see those actions. And the humility of those who live under God's mighty hand, well, that's not simply a lack of pride. It's not simply an understanding of the limitations that we all have. It is a realistic expectation and realization that God's grace is the key to understanding who I am and what I am not. It's the same grace. That same grace is the key to understanding what I am able to do and what I am not able to do. And the ability and the awareness to recognize that will remove us in large part from the tyranny of living our lives trying to reverse what God has already ordered for us. Here's the issue. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7. Let's look at that now. 1 Corinthians 4, verse 7. For who makes you different than anyone else? This is Paul. For who makes you different than anyone else? Well, the answer is God. What do you have that you did not receive? Nothing. We've received it all from God. And if you did receive it, why do you boast as though you did not? We just have to understand where all blessings flow, from whom all blessings flow. It's elementary logic. It's very straightforward. And it's laid out right there for us. Can I ask you a question this morning? Are you a contented person? You really think that the answer is going to be going into a room full of people and having them tell you how great you are? And if you think that that's the answer, why doesn't the Bible tell us that that's the answer? In fact, why does the Bible tell us exactly the opposite is the answer? That only in humility, when we are humble enough to bow before God, are we going to understand who and what we are and what we were made for. I'm never going to be an opera singer. Heck, you've heard me. I'm never going to be any kind of a singer. But you know, there are many other things in life that I am never going to be. But you, Creator God, have made me in such a way, according to your almighty plan and purpose, as miraculous as that may seem to others, and in humble recognition of that fact lies wholeness. Are you there yet? Many aren't. Families are fractured. Lives are torn and destroyed. As people scurry here and scurry there and everywhere just to try and make sense of the person that they wish they were. Humility lives under God's mighty hand, and happily so. Finally, humility is able to look with expectation to the day of exaltation. It says, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time." Now, when you first read that verse, it may lead you to think that this is a motivating principle, that you have to do this in order to get this. I don't think so. The more that I've studied this, I think that it's more about explanation rather than motivation. And it's an explanation on the basis of verse 5. God's put this all together in such a way that he opposes the proud, and yet he gives grace to the humble. Therefore, the only people that he is going to be able to exalt are those who live humbly under his mighty hand. So he says this by way of explanation. If you want to live one day in glory with him, well, you have to live this way today. And it will only be those who have humbled themselves that God will lift up, because he's pledged himself to that approach. Isaiah 57:15. "For this is what the high and lofty one says, he who lives forever, whose name is holy. I live in a high and holy place, but also with him who is contrite and lowly in spirit, to revive the spirit of the lowly and to revive the heart of the contrite." Humility challenges the preoccupation of our personal lives, challenges the patterns of our prevailing culture. Now it's up to you and up to me to wrestle with this instruction, to put on the apron of humility, to somehow rear our children in a very, very different environment than the one we were raised, and somehow become salt and light as a result of these principles taking root in our lives.